So a 25 years old female was diagnosed with choriocarcinoma, and how do you like to manage her? Do you want to do chemotherapy, resection, hysterectomy, young female? Can you do that? Let us take up all those issues. Surgery is the treatment, those who are having stage 1 disease. Future fertility is not required, she finished the family and she is resistant to chemotherapy. But that is not the first choice. Chemotherapy is considered to be the first choice in the case of a young female who is in the reproductive age group diagnosed with choriocarcinoma. And choriocarcinoma, when it undergoes any metastasis to the brain, what is the role? Is there any role for radiation? Definitely. Whole brain radiation is used conjunction with chemotherapy. Only for the cerebral mets it is having a great role. And the best treatment on any given day is basically the chemotherapy, especially those chemotherapeutic agents which work on the S phase and M phase of the cell cycle, they need to be basically be given. And what is choriocarcinoma, doctor? It is a malignant gestational trophoblastic tumor. You also have benign gestational trophoblastic conditions also, like molar pregnancy, etc., etc. Do they also require the chemotherapy? Generally the benign gestational trophoblastic diseases do not require the chemotherapy. Only 20% of the patients who have a molar pregnancy, hydatidiform mole, they go into a state of choriocarcinoma. Some studies suggested that though it is benign, these molar pregnancies also require a prophylactic methotrexate, especially in those patients who cannot come for a regular follow-up of their beta HCG levels. Because beta HCG will give you a clue in a case of molar pregnancy whether a given molar pregnancy transformed into a malignant choriocarcinoma is what need to be basically remembered. So observing serial serum HCG levels, beta HCG levels is the way that we monitor the patients. So in conclusion, how do you want to treat with chemotherapy? You have two choices: single agent methotrexate only you can give, or you can give multitude, around 4 agents you can give. Which subset of patients you want to give single agent methotrexate therapy? Those who are having the malignant gestational trophoblastic neoplasia which is still non-metastatic, those subset, and those who have a metastatic but a low risk gestational trophoblastic neoplasia. Then how will you decide whether it is low risk or high risk? Histologically, WHO has given certain criteria and scoring system which will grade the choriocarcinoma into a low grade and a high grade one. According to that we take a decision. And those who have a poor liver function, we give the actinomycin D, and serum HCG need to be basically monitored, and at least after 3 to 4 serum HCG levels become normalized, then instead of every week monitoring of HCG, you can give it once a month monitoring for the next 1 year. So those who are having the WHO score greater than 8, they need to basically have a more than 4 drug regime is what need to be basically remembered. So those who have a high risk metastatic gestational trophoblastic neoplasia, in turn you can divide them into 2 groups: WHO score less than 8, WHO score more than 8 is what need to be remembered. Those who have less than 8 score, for such people methotrexate, actinomycin D, cyclophosphamide, what is that regime called? MAC regime is the one which you have to use in the chemotherapy. Whereas those who have scores greater than 8, for them we have to use a regime called IMACO regime, where E for etoposide and M for methotrexate and A for actinomycin D and cyclophosphamide and vincristine. The combination IMACO regime is the one which is being generally used. So you are very sure what chemotherapy in what scenarios. One of the favorite topic of the examiners. A multiparous woman with the previous LSCS, 38 weeks of pregnancy, comes with shock. So what are the causes of shock in obstetrics? It can be hemorrhagic fluid loss. Even a lady who is lying down fully gravid, the uterus can compress the IVC and decrease the venous return, called the supine hypertension syndrome. Could be one of the causes. Septic shock, cardiogenic, neurogenic, Any of them are very much possible. A second trimester, woman has got a over distended uterus, then what are the common causes where there is a discrepancy between clinical examination which is showing a bigger uterus and the gestational age according to calculation is showing a lesser value? What is the cause for this disproportion? Multiple fetuses, elevation of the uterus because of the distended bladder, you must be doubly sure to ask the lady to empty her bladder. Inaccurate menstrual history in fact is the most common cause which will be leading to the development of this discrepancy. Hydramnios, hydatiform mole, uterine myomas and any adnexal mass or any fetal macrosomia, any of them can cause a disproportion between the size and the date which had been calculated. Now let us talk about the ectopic pregnancy. How do you identify that? Typically it is the transvaginal ultrasound and serum HCG. They are the ones which will help you. How to recognize based on the serum beta HCG levels, doctor? What is the normal value of HCG in a non-pregnant female? Around 0 to 2 milli international units per milliliter, otherwise international units per liter, 0 to 2. In the first trimester, what do you expect? Serum beta HCG levels should be how much? In the first 1 week after conception, you expect that it should be somewhere between 50 to 500 international units it should be. Now, is it a single serum beta HCG helpful for you to monitor the female? Serial value should be done. Do the value today. The value is 120. After 48 hours, if you once more check what should be the value, 240. So it is a doubling time of the serum beta HCG which will help you to know whether pregnancy is going well or not. Sometimes a female who has got a low serum beta HCG, instead of 200 or 300 in the second week of after fertilization, instead of 300, 400, suppose she has got 30 or 40 is the value of serum beta HCG. Ectopic pregnancy must be always be on high cards. And similarly, if the doubling is not occurring every 48 hours, it is a risky scenario. One of the causes could be she is about to have a spontaneous abortion. Second possibility is probably she is having an ectopic, is the important conclusion. So urinary HCG is not helpful. Serum HCG is the one. If it fails to double in every 2 days, that is an indicator of an ectopic pregnancy. And beta HCG plus sonography, they both are helpful as a combination to identify the presence of ectopic pregnancy. How much should be the minimum value of the serum beta HCG level for the transvaginal ultrasound to pick up the gestational ring, doctor? At least 1000 international units of HCG levels must be there in the plasma of the patient. So this is how the transvaginal ultrasound can pick up. You can see this is the ovary, and typically in the fallopian tube the embryo got implanted. You can see the gestational sac. So this is an example of an ectopic pregnancy picked up by doing the transvaginal ultrasound. This is what need to be recognized. Glucose tolerance test, where do you want to do? Whether there is a big baby, history of diabetes, and any of the family members had that, and repeated abortions, because uncontrolled diabetes is one of the causes for the development of a recurrent abortion, is what need to be basically remembered. Placenta previa. Conservative treatment is typically not done in certain scenarios, and conservative treatment is okay in certain scenarios. So let us talk. You have a patient of placenta previa with an abnormal implantation towards the os. How do you want to basically manage it? If at all the fetus is preterm and immediate delivery is unnecessary, that is fetus is less than 37 weeks of gestation, hemorrhage is not there, then on an outpatient basis you can carry on the expectant management. But if the fetus is reasonably mature, and if at all the patient is in labor, and if there is a severe hemorrhage which is there, then that is the indication there. The woman should immediately be started on crystalloids or blood to retain to prevent hypotension, and she need to be taken for a trial labor, and that is considered to be the management of choice, no more expectant. especially if it is the anterior marginal placenta previa, you can give an oxytocin augmentation with the trial of the labor. And suppose if the bleeding is persistent and for a trial labor, if the placental type is not permitting you for a trial labor, then cesarean section is considered to be the management of choice. So there is a reason, doctor, in this given scenario, the woman in active labor, if there is an anencephaly, if there is a dead baby, if there is a severe placenta previa, there are all the indications to no more continue the conservative management and hasten the delivery of the baby either by trial labor or by cesarean. Whereas if the fetus is premature, definitely less than 37 weeks, and the woman is not in still labor, that is the indication for conservative management on an outpatient basis. That is how you basically conclude. Now let us go to the next question. Dysgerminoma is a counterpart of seminoma, highly radiosensitive tumor. Can you give me classical examples of sensitive tumors, Dr. Radiosensitive dysgerminoma, seminoma, Ewing sarcoma? Yes, they are all classical examples. So if you look at ovarian tumors, doctor, broadly you have epithelial tumors, germ cell tumors and sex cord tumors. That is how you basically divide. Majority of the ovarian neoplasms, they are all epithelial neoplasms, as all of you know very well. And out of the germ cell tumors, it is the dysgerminoma which is the most common type out of all, is the common statistics. Now, what is the common age group where most of the ovarian cancers are suspected or they happen, doctor? Between 50 to 60. But dysgerminoma is an exception for that rule. Typically it is a tumor which is diagnosed in the age group 20 years before that, between 30 to 40 is the age group where it is being found. So a woman in a reproductive age group, dysgerminoma constitutes one of the major tumor. So in the reproductive age group females, what are the other tumors possible? Epithelial tumors, then dysgerminomas, metastatic Krukenberg and sex cord stromal cell tumor, certainly Leydig cell tumor, their different frequencies. So dysgerminoma does not fall among the ovarian tumors which are postmenopausal. It falls in the ovarian tumors which occur in the reproductive age group females is what has to be remembered. That is what exactly the examiner likes to know from you. Is it postmenopausal or is it in the reproductive age group? Then the other thing the examiner is seriously interested is alpha fetoprotein levels. Generally ovarian tumors are notorious to produce high levels of AFP. Is the dysgerminoma an exception? Very much an exception. Always the rule of the game that we need to remember is, if at all there is a rise of alpha fetoprotein in a given ovarian tumor, it is no more a pure germ cell tumor. It also has got a component of something else. So that is the reason, doctor, dysgerminomas per se purely do not produce a rise of the alpha fetoprotein is what need to be basically remembered. Now is there any increased risk of dysgerminomas in those women who are pseudo hermaphrodites or who have a gonadal dysgenesis like Turner? Definitely. Just like undescended testis, they have high chances of seminoma. Ovarian dysgenesis people have more chances of dysgerminoma is what need to be basically remembered. So it is in the young women, mean age is 22 years, third to fourth decade is the common age group. They present like the unilateral masses and they can occur even during pregnancy, and generally the alpha fetoprotein is absent. If at all it is elevated in a suspected case of dysgerminoma, we should need to think the other possibilities like endodermal sinus tumor which is coexistent along with the dysgerminoma as a mixed histology. Then only the alpha fetoprotein levels become elevated is what I like to underscore. Quickly revise all the tumor markers, doctor. Typically choriocarcinoma beta HCG, endodermal sinus tumor is alpha fetoprotein, dysgerminoma is typically LDH elevation is the one which you come across. But though alpha fetoprotein is not elevated, but alpha fetoprotein assessment is a part of the tumor marker assessment in a given case of dysgerminoma to know whether it is a pure dysgerminoma or a mixed histology. So finally, what are all that you check in a case of dysgerminoma? Beta HCG, is it there? Then you think choriocarcinoma plus dysgerminoma coexisted. Alpha fetoprotein, is it there or not? If it is there, then there is endodermal sinus tumor coexistent. Lactate dehydrogenase anyway normally expected to rise in a case of dysgerminoma, and also CA125, which is generally found in all the ovarian tumors, is what need to be remembered. Now how does the histology, gross section, does it cause a gritty appearance? Is one of the gritty texture on cut section. So examiner wants you to cut also and then feel it. No more imagination is permissible. So let us cut it and see. Typically dysgerminomas have got a solid structure, flesh-like appearance, and they have a pale brown appearance in the parenchyma with the collagenous scars, is what you are able to see here, is a typical picture. And microscopically they have abundance of those cells which have a lot of glycogen build-up, and a lot of granulocytic lymphocytic infiltration will be there in that lymphocytic stroma, in that collagenous stroma. So this is a very important feature. They don't give that typical gritty kind of feel. And GATA4, BMP2, there are various transcription factors which will help you to differentiate dysgerminoma from that of any other germ cell tumor, is what need to be remembered. Then why did the examiner is talking about gritty consistency? We must be sure which ovarian tumor has gritty, right? So once more from the question bank, next question in the next PGI is going to be that. So it is the gonadoblastomas which are lobulated, soft to firm, grey tan to brown, slightly lobulated, and multifocal calcified areas will be there, which gives that gritty sensation while doing the cut section, is what you have to be very sure about. Now let's go to the next question. Early detection for the fetal heart, when can you do that? Before 6 weeks. So some of you are going to handle most precious pregnancies. 15 years of infertility, somebody became pregnant, you are going to take care. So you must know almost every day you will be checking the fetal heart. So precious pregnancies management is a specialization in itself. Diabetes in pregnancy, what are the problems that can happen? Miscarriages, birth defects can occur. Normally only 1 to 2% congenital birth abnormalities will be found. But there is an increase of 4 to 8-fold, especially when it is a diabetic pregnancy. Growth restriction can occur, growth acceleration can occur with macrosomia. When will IUGR occur instead of macrosomia in a case of diabetic mother, doctor? Those who have a vascular disease. For example, a long-standing IDDM is there. She is having macrovascular complications, then that can lead to decreased blood flow to the fetus, which can lead to IUGR. So both growth restriction and macrosomia, both of the things are possible in diabetic pregnancy. Then fetal obesity greater than 4,000 gram baby is very much possible. And tell me all the 6 complications in the fetus, in the newborn with a diabetic mother. They can have hyperbilirubinemia, hypoglycemia, respiratory distress. Why respiratory distress? Because maternal hyperglycemia stimulates the fetal insulin, and insulin is an inhibitor of surfactant. So that leads to development of respiratory distress, because the hyperinsulinemia in the fetus is what need to be remembered. Transient tachypnea of the newborn is more common in the fetuses born to the babies born to the diabetic mothers. Similarly, hypocalcemia, cardiomyopathy, polycythemia, they are all the complications in the newborn who is born to the diabetic mother. Cervical incompetence and prolapse. They are the 2 topics, their surgical management and stress and urge incontinence, their management. These 3 areas you must be encyclopedic, doctor. Entrance loves to know from you, are you very sure on these concepts? So already we discussed in a great detail in the last session. McDonald's, Shirodkar's, etc. are done. Some of them are reversible, some are irreversible stapling of the cervical os, in those cases of the incompetent os leading to the recurrent abortions. OCPs are protective against three important malignancies which are estrogen dependent: endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer, choriocarcinoma indirectly, they are very much protective. Certain benign conditions also they prevent if OCP is prescribed. Benign breast disease, ovarian functional cysts, fibromyoma of uterus, they are all found to be less in incidence in those who are OCP takers. Similarly, ectopic pregnancy, anemia, endometriosis, acne, hirsutism, rheumatoid arthritis, osteoporosis, these are all also decreased if the OCPs are prescribed. But there are two malignancies which are found to have a higher chance in OCP takers: cervical cancer and liver malignancy, and still whether OCPs cause high chance of breast malignancy is controversial. This is the only issue frequently tested in the entrance, any entrance that we take. So we must be crystal clear on our concepts. Now let us talk as a cardiothoracic surgeon, how do you want to manage a case of valvular heart disease in pregnancy? It is best to avoid the mitral valvotomy, and if at all you are contemplating surgery, it is 14 to 18 weeks of gestation, which is the best time to do the surgery, is what need to be remembered. But presence of pulmonary hypertension already in a case of mitral stenosis is a contraindication to repair that mitral stenosis anymore, is the carry home message. So what is the indication for surgery in a case of mitral stenosis, doctor? You can see right ventricular outlet, outflow tract, and here you can see left atrium, left ventricle. Between them you have the mitral valve with the anterior leaflet and posterior leaflet, and the leaflets do not move briskly if there is a mitral stenosis. Fish mouth appearance in mitral stenosis. Then what will happen? How can 2D echo and interventions can help you to take a decision to operate or not? Calculate the transvalvular pressure gradient. If the transvalvular pressure gradient is 5 to 15 millimeters of mercury across the valve, stenotic mitral valve, then it is called a moderate, and if it is between greater than 15 millimeters of mercury, it is called severe type of MS, and they are the indications, especially in symptomatic patients, to go ahead with the operative correction of them is what need to be remembered. Now the other options given were aortic stenosis in young age is because of the bicuspid valve, very much a true statement. Generally it is the degenerative calcification of the aortic cusps which will be responsible for the development of the aortic stenosis in a very elderly person. Some people can have congenital bicuspid aortic valves. What is the normal nature of the aortic valve, doctor? It has three cusps. Instead of that there are two cusps, one of the common congenital heart disease which become only symptomatic in the adult life. What is the other congenital heart disease in adult life? ASD is the one which remains silent and expresses itself clinically in the adult life. Then rheumatic aortic stenosis is the one which can also be associated with the aortic regurgitation, as what you are able to see here is an indication for operative correction of it. So let us look what are all the scenarios that we have before us. Mitral surgery is better avoided in pregnancy, mitral stenosis surgery, definitely. But if at all you have to operate, between 14 to 16 weeks is the right time. And the mitral stenosis with the pressure gradient 10 definitely is a moderate to severe type of MS, it requires a surgery. Now one of the options is about tricuspid regurgitation. Let us talk about it. Where is the tricuspid valve located? Right atrioventricular, right? So if there is any pulmonary hypertension, all the pressure will fall on the right ventricle. That will fall on the right atrium and tricuspid. So those who have pulmonary hypertension will automatically have a functional tricuspid regurgitation, not organic problem of the valves. The moment pulmonary hypertension is taken care, even the tricuspid regurgitation also will resolve, as all of you know very well. But now the question comes, what are those scenarios without pulmonary hypertension there can be development of tricuspid regurgitation if at all valvular problem is there. For example, if there is any carcinoid heart disease with the carcinoid vegetations on the right side of the heart on the tricuspid valve, that can make the valve to wean down and that can lead to regurgitation. Similarly, endomyocardial fibrosis can cause tricuspid valve to become deranged. Any trauma to the tricuspid, because right ventricle is anterior, just below the sternum. Any trauma can cause an injury at that level and can cause tricuspid injury. And any right ventricular papillary muscle infarction in a case of ischemic heart disease. These are all the indications where isolated TR without any associated pulmonary hypertension can occur is what need to be remembered. After 28 weeks of gestation, what are all the true statements about pulmonary surfactant? When do you call fetus as a viable fetus, doctor? Typically at 20 weeks in developed countries and 28 weeks in developing countries. That means we are dead for 8 weeks more by being born in India. Are we developing or developed, doctor? Nowhere we stand. We are not sure about it. We have millionaires a lot in this country, and at the same time starvation deaths are also there. So that is the heterogeneity of our nation, right? So type 2 alveolar epithelial cells by the end of the 6th month, 24 to 26 weeks of gestation, will start producing surfactant. And fetal weight at around 28 weeks is between 800 to 1500 grams. Then what is the amniotic fluid LS ratio, the lecithin sphingomyelin ratio, which speaks about the level of fetal maturity. Typically at 31 to 32 weeks it is 1, 35 weeks it is 2, and greater than 2 indicates pulmonary maturity. We need to be doubly sure about all these very important values. And typically phosphatidyl glycerol will appear in the amniotic fluid at around 36 weeks of gestation. It is a marker of the surfactant production, and the maturity of the lungs is what need to be remembered. Now what are those agents which are called spermicidal? They bring a change in the surface tension levels and causes the killing of the sperm. Nanoxynol 9, menfegol and octoxinol, they are all the ones which are typically used as spermicidal agents is what need to be remembered. In Turner syndrome, what do you come across? Expo, ovarian dysgenesis, hence infertility, streak ovaries will be there, coarctation of aorta, webbing of the neck, and pedal edema at the birth, and primary amenorrhea, not the secondary amenorrhea, is what has to be remembered. Now cystic fibrosis is one of the hit topics for the entrance, doctor, which we have to be sure about. Chromosome 7 is the one which need to be remembered about cystic fibrosis. It is autosomal recessive in inheritance, and it can cause all those viscid secretions which can lead to meconium ileus, respiratory tract problems, and all those viscid secretions can lead to the development of bronchiectasis because of the cystic fibrosis, as all of you know very well. It can also lead to pancreatic insufficiency because all those viscid secretions block the pancreatic duct, and pancreatic enzymes cannot go out, so they will digest their own pancreas, leading to pancreatic pancreatitis chronically. And because lipase of those pancreatic enzymes is not entering into gut, it leads to fat malabsorption. So all these problems will be there. Azoospermia can be there, and the sweat chloride greater than 60 milliequivalents per liter is highly indicative of. So how do you manage cystic fibrosis? Respiratory care and supportive care for all the various organ dysfunctions. Let us talk about the protein energy malnutrition. They can have hypothermia, these babies, and hypoglycemia, hypokalemia, all can be the problem. Is total energy malnutrition, whereas kwashiorkor happens whenever carbohydrate consumption is good but protein consumption has come down, and that lead to edema, low protein. That is what is happening in kwashiorkor. Now in hypothermia, what are all the complications which can very much happen? The normal body temperature of the human beings is 37 degrees, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. It's called stage 1 hypothermia when 1 to 2 degrees Celsius it has come down below the normal, and at this point of time the breathing become quick and shallow. In stage 2 it is 2 to 4 degrees of fall, and stage 3 it is falls all the way down to the level of 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That lead to intense peripheral vasoconstriction leading to acrocyanosis, decreased peripheral perfusion. It leads to CNS depression, lethargy, apnea, poor feeding, hypoglycemia, metabolic acidosis, tachypnea, respiratory distress, weight loss, they are all the problems with the hypothermia, a topic in itself in the pediatrics. Now V's, all V's are not asthma. What are they? They can also be congestive heart failure, which can lead to development of pulmonary edema, which can cause bronchoconstriction, which can lead to development of V's. So let us talk about the causes of the wheezing. Typically those who have taken beta blockers, drugs are one of the important cause. Your patient can develop bronchoconstriction, which you have to be doubly sure about. In fact, in geriatric practice, any patient with V's without any history of bronchial asthma coming to you, you should always look at his, what drugs earlier doctor has prescribed, minimum thing that need to be done. Aspirin, common reason for the development of V's. Those who received contrast media and hydrocortisone, which is used in the intravenous formulations, propellants which are used in the meter dosed inhalers, and vaccines, idiosyncratic drug reactions, etc., etc. They are all the causes. Similarly, if a patient is a case of COPD, if he has got a V's, think of beta blockers, familial angioedema, and idiosyncratic allergic reactions. So if you look at systemic causes for the development of wheezing other than asthma, any aspiration, COPD, endobronchial tumors, pulmonary edema, vocal cord dysfunction, amyloidosis, carcinoid, goiter, granuloma, post-radiation, pulmonary emboli, sepsis, so many reasons are there why the V's can occur other than the bronchial asthma. Now, anti-tubercular therapy in children, we use INH, rifampin, isoniazid, ethambutol. Suppose if there is a resistance, how do you want to manage it? Quinolone, ofloxacin, aminoglycosides, ethionamide, cyclosporine or PAS, they need to be given as alternative anti-tubercular therapy. In the case of the children, even ofloxacin is the one which is indicated very much. In type 1 diabetes, what are the complications, doctor? They can develop retinopathy. After how much time after type 1 diabetes it will become a complication? After 5 years of type 1 diabetes. Whereas that's the reason you have to do serial fundoscopic examination after 5 years in case of the IDDM. How about the NIDDM? NIDDM is like a tip of iceberg. He suffered glucose intolerance for a long time. Now you detected it. So there is a reason already they must have had progressive retinal involvement. So from the day of diagnosis itself, you must carefully watch the fundus serially in order to know the progression towards the diabetic retinopathy is what need to be remembered. Now congenital hypothyroidism. Recently we took up this topic in our Sunday test. So what are the features of it is the examiner's favorite question. So there can be an open posterior fontanelle, umbilical hernia, edematous characteristic facies, constipation, hypothermia, large tongue, rough and dry skin, hypotonia, flaccid muscles and large abdomen, sleepy face and very little cry, poor feet, short neck, thick supraclavicular pad of fat, short stature and short extremities, sexual precocity, refractory anemia sometimes, they all can be the presenting features of hypothyroidism. In pediatric population you should have a high index of suspicion basically to diagnose. Let us talk about G6PD deficiency. Is it more common in boys? Definitely, just like hemophilia, because it is X-linked recessive condition, G6PD deficiency. And it is the hexose monophosphate shunt, otherwise called the pentose phosphate pathway, which require NADPH, and that is a very important, is the sole source of the NADPH is HMP shunt in the case of the RBCs. What happens if G6PD deficient, HMP shunt cannot go ahead, NADPH is not there. Why do we require NADPH in RBC? Because whenever oxygen free radicals are produced, they want to go and attack the RBC membrane. We want to detoxify those radicals, oxygen free radicals. How do you do that? You use the reducing equivalents, H plus ions provided by the NADPH and detoxify those oxygen free radicals. So if there is no NADPH, there can't be any detoxification, and that oxygen free radicals will cause the denaturation of hemoglobin and cause the lysis of the RBC membrane is what need to be remembered. So you have three forms of G6PD deficiency. Type 1 is mildest, 2 is moderately severe, and 3 is called the non-spherocytic hemolytic anemia. Now tell me, doctor, what are all the drugs which can lead to development of hemolysis in a case of G6PD deficient individual? Antimalarials, sulfonamides, nitrofuran, synthetic vitamin K, favobeans, infection, even diabetic ketoacidosis can lead to the development of hemolysis is what need to be remembered. Whenever there is an oxidant stress, typically the hemoglobin become denatured and it's called the hinge bodies in which it will be appearing, and those cells will have that bitten appearance called the bite cells. They are the characteristic feature of the G6PD deficiency. And these people are immune to the falciparum malaria, but they are susceptible to the rickettsial infections. G6PD deficiency is what need to be remembered. Now, which type of cells will die with this oxidant injury if there is a G6PD deficiency? Generally older cells will die. But in the severe most form of G6PD deficiency, type 3 is there, no? Both young and old cells, both of them will die. That is the difference between the different forms is what need to be remembered. So we use the supravital staining in order to recognize those hinge bodies, and the bite cells is what has to be remembered. Mild mental retardation, does it have anything to do with the socio-economic status? Though a lot of intellectuals are born in the countries which are impoverished, and honestly no relation between intelligence and or any such thing to that of the Lakshmi and Saraswati have no relationship between each other. In fact, one can be more the place where the other is less. But the international studies have shown mild mental retardation is common in those countries which are communities with a low socio-economic status. Only mild, not moderate and severe ones. So when do you call mild? When the IQ is between 55 to 70, it constitutes the largest group of mental retardation. Low socio-economic status definitely has got a relationship, which is the specific question examiner is asking us. Let us talk about the kernicterus. How do you manage that? Exchange transfusion, phototherapy, phenobarbital, metalloporphyrins. There are all the various options. And if it is because of the breastfeeding jaundice, you have to take a decision to increase the number of feeds. And there are the different methods by which you can bring down the jaundice.